Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on ensuring LGBTQ+ inclusivity in your workplace. I'm Emily Stubbs, Senior Policy and Projects Manager at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. And today's session, as some of you might have spotted, is part of our Growth Through People campaign in 2023. Growth Through People is in its, I believe, 6th year now, and aims to help local firms boost productivity and grow through improved leadership and people management techniques. So we share a ton of best practice on topics like responsible leadership, attracting and engaging talent, unlocking potential and harnessing resilience throughout March. And then we've got an annual conference taking place on the 10th of May this year. Without further ado, we'll get into this webinar. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We've got Becky Piggott, who is Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator at Kier Highways, who'll be talking about LGBTQ+ inclusion at Kier Highways. And then Matt Daniels, co-founding management committee member at the Alliance Network. He'll be talking about, from his perspective, how you ensure LGBTQ+ inclusivity in your workplace and different techniques to do that. And then we'll be moving into a Q&A. So please do, as we're going along, put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function, and we'll have a really interesting conversation at the end of the session. Becky, without further ado, can I hand over to you to talk us through LGBTQ+ inclusion at Kier Highways?
Of course, yeah, thank you. Hi everybody, good morning. So yeah, as Emily said, I'll be chatting to you today about what we do at Kier for LGBTQ+ inclusion. So I'll just give Karen a second, thank you. So we do lots at Kier, and just to give you a bit of a context about the kind of structure of Kier, we have Kier Group, which is all of our businesses. And then I work specifically in our highways business. So I work closely with the people in group. So a lot of our inclusion is in highways specifically, in our events and our awareness days, but then is also group wide. So if we can go to the next slide. So the first thing I want to talk about, because I think it's probably the most important in terms of how our LGBTQ+ colleagues feel included, is our Pride Network. So we've got 6 employee-led networks within Kier, and that includes the Pride Network, which is actually our longest running. So that one's been going since 2017. And each of our networks have at least one executive sponsor from senior leadership. So there are many objectives of the network, and these are the main 5. So connecting the LGBT+ community and allies across Kier, across all of our businesses, sharing the lived experiences of the LGBT+ community with the wider business, constructively challenging prejudice, misconceptions and microaggressions, providing support and advice for the LGBT+ community and other colleagues, and promoting Kier as a diverse and inclusive place to work within Kier, but also externally. So the network shares really important resources. It facilitates different discussions. It provides support to LGBT+ employees and allies if they have questions or they want to discuss things. It helps to educate our workforce. And then it feeds into our larger D&I strategy and roadmap. So all of our networks, the network leads, meet regularly with everybody within Kier who's working in D&I to make sure we're actually performing against our objectives and our strategy. The networks have also recently launched listening circles. So that's where people with shared identities can come together in a safe space to have really meaningful conversations. And I think the network importance and how much it matters to people is really clear from how often the conversations carry on long after our network meetings or events. So if they're held in teams, that team video finishes, but long after that, the chat is still going. People are still talking about the topics that were discussed in that meeting or anything else. And then weeks later, somebody might pop back into that chat to show or share something that they've seen recently. So it's really high engagement, and it really is one of the pillars of how our employees feel included. And we'll go to the next slide. So one of the things through the Pride Network that we've done is celebrating Pride. So in 2019 and last year, 2022, we attended London Pride and marched in the parade. And this year we'll be attending Birmingham Pride. So obviously our employees came, had a great time, but I think what was so lovely about us attending Pride is that employees brought along their partners and their children to march with us. So that means that not only are we able to demonstrate our commitment and our support of the LGBT+ community publicly through taking part in Pride, but we're also making an inclusive environment that really touches beyond just our company or our industry. And we're also inspiring those future generations before they even enter the workplace. So showing our children nieces, nephews, whoever it was that our employees brought, that this is what workplaces can be like. They can be this inclusive. You can get involved in this kind of fun stuff and be part of a community. Next slide, please. So we do loads of internal activity at Kier. All of our internal D&I activity will benefit and create an inclusive environment for LGBT+ employees. So that could be the D&I roadmap that I mentioned, or in Highways specifically, we have our own D&I strategy and action plan. We do lots of surveys to solicit employee feedback, gauge how included people are feeling. We have an empowered development program for anybody from underrepresented or historically marginalized groups, which I'll go into a bit more in a moment. And we have reverse mentoring. So all of those kind of larger D&I initiatives do benefit and help our LGBT+ employees. But I think the ones that specifically mention or benefit them are firstly our data collection. So in 2022, we launched self-service for D&I data in our HR system. So previously, all of our data was from kind of annual surveys, which is quite a static data point. So now in our HR systems, people can go in, share their sexual orientation and their gender identity, and they can change that as and when they need to because it's self-service. So it's demonstrating to our employees that we understand that all of this kind of exists on a spectrum, and it can be quite a journey of discovery for many people. So the ability for them to be able to go in and change that as and when they need to, or as and when they feel comfortable, is really important. And then that data allows us to understand the demographic of our workforce. So then we can see if there's any gaps or barriers facing particular groups. Lots of people say that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so this is really what helps us do that. That data makes us see if people from certain groups are promoted at different rates, if they have higher turnover, if they're not in senior positions, anything like that. And then we can use that alongside that survey with the qualitative data to see how people are really feeling. We also have policies that are obviously beneficial for employees from particular groups. So we have ones like gender identity and gender expression policy, and we also have a transitioning policy. But there's also the other policies that will benefit the LGBT+ community, like our family-friendly policies. So they're always reviewed for inclusivity, for the appropriate language, and they can benefit this group. So those are ones like our surrogacy and adoption policies, or also our newer fertility policy that we launched last year. And then we also celebrate awareness days. So that's either through bigger events like Pride, or just by sharing resources through comms, educating our employees on some of the other days. Let me skip to the next slide. So one example of this that I wanted to share, because I think in terms of kind of best practice, if you're looking to do something for an awareness day, this is a great one to do, was National Inclusion Week. So National Inclusion Week is every September. And last year we dedicated each day to a different one of our networks. So I believe it was the Friday, the final day that we did the LGBT+ network, the Pride network. And on that day, we shared resources, so things for people to watch, things for people to listen to, things for people to read, to really increase their knowledge, to educate themselves, but to lead that themselves and be the kind of driving force of their own education. And then each day we shared microaggressions on that topic as well. So on the first day, we explained what a microaggression was. And then in each subsequent day, we shared relevant ones for people to avoid, because I think a lot of the time people don't know what these things are, and they don't know that they might be doing them. They don't know that they might be saying things that might be offensive to some. So we go into everything with a really open mind of just educating and raising awareness. Next one, please. So I mentioned earlier our development program, which is our Empower program. So that launched in March 2022, and it's to help those from historically marginalized group develop into leadership roles. So we've seen that applications for the Empower program for people from the global majority, for example, are far higher than any of our other development programs for the same audience or grades. So I think this is a combination of this being a program specifically for people from these groups, so they feel really comfortable that they'll be given that kind of development opportunity without bias. But also this is a self-nominated development program. So compared to a manager or talent process, which can have those kind of inbuilt biases, this removes them. So it's people being able to nominate themselves for this leadership program. That has different pillars within it. So the first is the formal learning. So that's all about understanding themselves, enhancing their leadership skills, and equipping them to really enhance their career and overcome barriers where they can. We have the reverse mentoring side, where they're partnered with a senior leader in Kier, So that's a great two-way relationship where they learn new skills and perspectives, and the senior leader benefits from their valuable insights and experiences. And then they also work in a catalyst group. So that's a small group from within the cohort. They work on a Kier-wide D&I project or issue. So it's an opportunity to get involved with different people on different tasks to their normal day job, but also to really help us to drive our D&I initiatives and our D&I actions forward and be involved in that. Next slide, please. So we have a flagship D&I campaign at Kier called Expect Respect. It is a group-wide, long-term campaign that focuses on educating our employees about the importance of respect in the workplace. So it outlines Kier's zero-tolerance approach to bullying and harassment, and it focuses on 5 respect basics at its pillars. So these are the ones that are on screen now, which are: banter is not an excuse, call it out, be open-minded, respect each other, and take action. So there's multiple posters for our Expect Respect campaign that are all over all of our offices, all of our depots. Many of them are on kind of external hoardings. And one of those is spotlighting LGBT microaggressions, which is the one that's on screen now. So they're really powerful campaign. It's something that we're kind of continuing to develop as it goes on. So we're now getting into Expect Respect 2.0, which includes an Expect Respect board game. So really looking at different ways that we can get people engaged in this and really embed it in the culture of everything at Kier. So the aim with this is that these 5 respect basics are as commonplace and as business as usual as any kind of health and safety basics, that people just know that this is how they are expected to behave when they were or on any of our sites or in any of our offices. And that also goes for any of our supply chain visitors, anybody like that, that when you enter Kier workspace, you can expect to be respected. And next slide, please. So in terms of that training, education and awareness piece, we have a few different aspects of that. So the first is our mandatory training. So that includes our Expect Respect training that goes with that campaign. It includes mandatory diversity and inclusion training for everybody. So at the moment we have 95.7% of Highways employees who have completed that D&I e-learning. And that obviously is also taking into account anybody new who joins. We have quite a high number of new joiners. And so that will warrant the kind of the ones that haven't done it yet. We have unconscious bias training, and we also have inclusive recruitment training. So that's for anybody who is in a position to hire, so hiring managers. Next slide, please. And then we have our other education and awareness pieces. So that's external training, lunch and learns, blogs and lived experiences. So during National Inclusion Week, we had the Proud Trust come in and do a session for us around transgender inclusion. And it was brilliant. It was really engaging. People asked lots of questions. We were really able to get people talking. And I do think where you can sometimes get external people in, it does just help break up if there's one person delivering things all the time or talking about things all the time. It can just be the thing that that one person speaks about. So if you can get somebody else to come in, that can always break that up and keep things engaging. Similarly with the blogs and lived experiences, where you can get people from the community that you're talking about speaking, that's much better than speaking for them. So we write blogs that are shared externally on our website and on LinkedIn. We have on the left-hand side here, a blog written by Ben, who was one of our co-chairs of the Pride Network, shared on our internal intranet. So really getting people to share their stories, share why this matters to them, share why it's not just a kind of HR activity or a tick box exercise, how these things really affect people and their experience within the workplace. So I think in terms of how you include LGBT plus employees or any of your employees, there are so many different avenues to go down, which I'm hoping that this is kind of demonstrated. It's not just a one and done. There's no silver bullet. There's not just one thing that you can do, tick off and say that's done. It's always developing. It's listening to your employees. It's adjusting things where you need to. Sometimes you might try something and it just doesn't work, and that's okay. As long as you're basing all of that on how your employees are feeling. And if they're feeding back to you that they're not feeling like they belong, they're not feeling included, then change what you do. But I think there's so much opportunity for that education piece, for that awareness raising, and for making sure that people have the room and the space to share their experiences. And the next slide should just be, thank you.
Thank you ever so much. I've spotted a few questions in the chat, but I'm going to hold off until we get to the Q&A section of the discussion. But no, thank you ever so much, Becky. And a great mix of kind of education and training, engagement and listening, and demonstrating support, embedding that respect in your culture, and then measuring that impact in a kind of ongoing and flexible way. Matt, over to you to talk about LGBTQ plus inclusion from the Alliance Network.
Okay, great. Just bear with me for a moment. I'll just get the presentation slides up. Okay, can everyone see those okay? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so my name's Matt Daniels, and I'm here today, two hats really. I'm the Managing Director of Myden Limited, which is a consultancy and training company that I run, but predominantly I'm here for the Midlands Alliance Network, of which I'm a co-founder. It's interesting hearing some of the stuff that Becky was talking about, and I'm very conscious as well. We'll have a real mix of representatives from organisations, some of which will be very small and some of which will be large, like Kier. What I'll take you through here is, I suppose, a number of different options that you can look at that may be the right fit for your organisation. Some organisations won't necessarily have the resources to do all of the things there, but it gives you food for thought, I think, to at least make a start where you need to, or to give you a nod if you're going in the right direction. Just a little bit of a plug for the Alliance Network. That's essentially why we were created. We have over 300 members so far. It's a voluntary organisation, so those of us on the management committee come together to do this because we feel it's the right thing to do. And as it says there, it's the professional network for the LGBTQ plus community across the Midlands. So we have representatives from HSBC, from KPMG, from Deutsche Bank, Barclays and so forth, but we've also got representation from, you know, one-man bands like myself through to small-scale organisations. And one of the biggest purposes for us of pulling this together initially was to create a professional space in which people who either represented individuals within the LGBTQ plus community or who had employees within that community could come together to have conversations, to discuss who and what they were, and to move forward with the community and with the agenda that was important to the community. Up here we've got a lot of words. So the ambition to be primary Midlands-based LGBTQ plus organisation that supports and connects individuals, organisations and networks in making the Midlands the best place to work for LGBTQ plus people in the UK, which is quite an ambitious claim. As I said, we've been going now since 2016. The objectives that we've got down here, best practice, sharing best practice between LGBTQ plus employee networks, employees, networking, providing an open and inclusive space where people can come together to talk and to engage. What we also wanted to do was to collaborate, so work with business and community groups to provide support, to hold events that reflect the West Midlands LGBTQ plus community, and have a collective response as well. So providing a forum for developing an appropriate collective response to LGBTQ plus issues. So to give a bit of an example, whilst COVID was around and we were all in lockdown, we held 3 successive briefing sessions, one of which we had the Director of Public Health speak at, another of which we had the Mayor Andy Street speak at, and the third we had the Director of Birmingham LGBT speak at. So each of these was really to talk to the business community, to the LGBTQ plus community within the business community around either emerging issues, concerns. Certainly, we all recognise it through COVID, people's mental health became much more important to monitor, to consider. But within the LGBTQ plus community, that was of particular importance because some of the rates are higher, and I'll get onto a slide very shortly that sort of talks a little bit more about that. So part of it was to look at that. Andy Street spoke about business, but also spoke in particular about the gay quarter and developments and plans, also the impact of COVID where, with bars and so forth. Obviously, the Director of Public Health, he talked about the general health that was going on and the issues that, as a Director of Public Health, he was facing, but also particularly around what that meant for the LGBTQ plus community, where support could be accessed. And similarly, the Director of Birmingham LGBT spoke on those matters, also some of the services and outreach that they were developing and delivering. So that's a really good example of how Alliance can play a good role for the community and for the business community. What we do, what we aim to do, in 2023, we're looking to undertake a minimum of 2 hybrid networking events across the Greater Birmingham area. So when I say hybrid, obviously some of that will be, they will be held face-to-face, but what we tend to do with these events is have a speaker to talk about something of particular importance, whether it might be around the use of pronouns, whether it might be around something actually that Becky's just done, talking about what her organisation does, and I'll certainly be having a chat with her afterwards to see where we might be able to engage again. And just to share best practice, it's become one of the most valuable ways for our network to work to enable people to come together and to learn from one another. And as I said at the outset, there are a lot of organisations that don't necessarily have the resource and the capacity or even the staff numbers. And what we really wanted to do when we set up was to create an umbrella support for organisations, be they great or small, and in particular to provide that support and to offer resource for those smaller organisations that didn't necessarily have budget and structure to do something that was positive to enable, support, encourage their LGBTQ plus workforce all through recruitment. Second thing that we wanted to focus on that we find very popular is to have a series of events. So we've just recently held the LGBT History Month quiz. It was on the 8th of March, even though the History Month was in February, but we were going with tradition there. And we had over 50 people come to that. Everyone made a donation, which went to Birmingham LGBT. So it's just a really good social event to bring people together. We also get involved in Birmingham Pride. So each year we've had successive numbers of people who join us on the walk under our Alliance banner. And actually that's really lovely to see one big Alliance banner and then all the different organisations that are associated and affiliated with this. And for me, it just shows a really good collective engagement and response. We're also looking to do something for National Coming Out Day and International Pronoun Day. Both of those are held in October, so we're looking to have one event that might be split in half, where we can explore both of those topics a little bit more. And World AIDS Day, which is also happening in December, on the 1st of December actually, 23. So we're going to be looking and seeing what we can do to celebrate that. There's an increasing, I don't know whether some of you will have seen a new sculpture that's just gone up around sort of near the Hippodrome, which commemorates those that are lost, but also recognises and remembers those who are with us, so how far we've come in terms of the fight against AIDS. So there are a number of things that we do. We are developing resources as well. We've got a website that we're currently overhauling at the moment. But as I said, the purpose of what we do is to support organisations to provide an external network and an opportunity for people to come together. So I would encourage all of you to have a look at our website, and I've got the details at the end of this presentation. Some people might ask, and in fact, I suppose to give you a little bit of background about me before I get into the detail. As I said, my name's Matt Daniels. I'm the Managing Director of Myden Limited. I was the Chair of Birmingham LGBT from 2010 to 2015, and that was in a period of time when the charity was going through significant expansion. And we won an award to create the first LGBTQ plus health and wellbeing centre in England and Wales. And some of you may not be aware of it. If you know the Radisson and the Chinese Pagoda roundabout, it's on the opposite side of the road from the Radisson. So it's, I have to give a plug to it because I've been long affiliated with it. And Birmingham LGBT offers support, resources, whether it be social, whether it be counselling, all sorts of services and support, as well as being a real hub for the community, the LGBTQ plus community. So again, if you're not aware of them. I would encourage you to sign up to their newsletters to get an understanding of what's available, what support's available, but also what information and what services are available for the LGBTQ+ community. So yeah, I also co-founded the Alliance Network, and for Birmingham LGBT, I delivered a national LGBTQ+ leadership program from 2016 to 19, and subsequently was their principal trainer over the last couple of years for an LGBTQ+ awareness program that they delivered. I'm also currently sitting as an inclusionary board member for the Warwickshire County Cricket Club, and as it says there, I've delivered numerous community consultations and contracts, and very recently I've just developed and launched my own briefing and awareness packages that are training courses. One's a 1 hour session, one's a 3.5 hour session for businesses and community members and public sector. So what I was going to get on to next was just to talk a little bit about the current situation, and you'll see some statistics here which go into some depth around the need for continued awareness and profiling of the LGBTQ+ sector, but also what strikes me particularly with these statistics at the top. And this was from a report, a BBC report that came out in October last year. And the statistics are from OCM, which talks about there being a 42% increase in homophobic attacks in the UK over the last 5 years, as well as a 56% increase in transphobic attacks in the UK. Now, some of those might be because people are reporting them more. I think we've all recognised a rise over the last 5 years or so, whether it be in homophobic and transphobic attacks, whether it be in racially motivated attacks. There has been an increase in violence. But for me, those statistics were quite shocking, because I think for a number of us, we see that with the LGBTQ+ community, that there is an increasing trend of acceptance and enablement. But I think these statistics really serve to stop us in our tracks and really consider we do need to educate, we do need to continue to educate, we do need to continue to support and enable. The second set of statistics that we have here, these have been fairly standard for quite a few years now. As it says there, half of LGBTQ+ people have experienced depression, 3 in 5 have experienced anxiety, 1 in 8 LGBTQ+ people aged 18 to 24 have attempted to end their life, and almost half of trans people have also thought about taking their life. So for me, and I noticed there was a question when Becky was talking about how do you get the buy-in from leadership, and for me, this is critical. These kind of statistics are how you start to get that buy-in, because the whole purpose, from my perspective, about education and training and enablement is so that people feel they're comfortable and they can give their best, and you can get the best out of your employees. What you need to do is understand where people are coming from, understand how you can do that best. I think Becky's given some really brilliant examples of how, as a large organisation, they've really embraced diversity, equality, inclusion. And here's just a few more things that I feel are really important when you are looking to engage and looking to support your LGBTQ+ staff. So the first 3 things here I just pulled together under recruitment and visibility. So obviously, firstly, think about where you advertise, as I think you probably would do in most cases. But if you're going through stock standard media, do consider putting in an advertisement. There's the Pink News, which is quite popular. Probably, I would say, one of the UK's biggest known and most widely read. But there are a number of others that you can Google and have a look at. But certainly, I think with social media, it's much easier these days to send a link if you've got colleagues, if you're aware of networks. Obviously, the Alliance network doesn't necessarily offer a function to be advertising, but certainly there will be different networks, and it might be that you send it out to, if you have an LGBTQ plus network within your organisation, you might particularly send it out to them and ask them to forward it onto their professional colleagues. But there are ways and means of doing that. Obviously, using different social media platforms. If you are encouraging people from minority groups, include the LGBTQ plus tag in there if you're going to be doing that. Also, another thing that you can do is look at representation around the workplace and in company literature. What I mean by that is, and quite often in my training, I use this as a good example. If you've got a reception space and you've got brochures around on the services that you offer, on the kind of activities that you deliver, is there anything in there that mentions the LGBTQ plus community? If it's relevant to, is there anything in your company literature for people who might be coming into the organisation? Is there anything in your induction procedures that talks about inclusivity and engagement with the LGBTQ plus community? Some people also, and it's become increasingly popular, will have rainbow lanyards. Again, it's a nod towards engagement, a nod towards recognition. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're identifying as part of the LGBTQ plus community. It just means that you're aware of that community and you're supporting or inclusive of that community. We also have things like, for example, posters that you might have or artwork that you might have around the office or around the office spaces. Again, are they representative? So, you know, I think we've probably all seen increasingly on things like television adverts, you'll have same-sex couples and those kind of things translated through into, whether it be posters, whether it be, as I said, literature, whether it be just a discrete message. And I remember talking with a client once around what they do, and they were a service provider, but it was a mental health service provider, and they just had along the corridors between the main reception area through to meeting rooms, they just had, you know, discrete literature that said, you know, if you're within the LGBT community, LGBTQ plus community, and you need to talk to somebody, come and speak to X or come and speak to Y. So it's just, again, it's about letting people know that they're supported, whatever community they're from, and that there's somewhere for them to go. And I'll get onto that shortly. Gender neutral facilities and language. So again, think about the language that you're using. Is it using a word here that, you know, some of you may not know, which is heteronormative. So we live in a heteronormative society where we kind of understand binary, man and woman, male, female. So think about how the language that you use, whether or not you are using that binary language or whether or not you could change that so that it's they and them, or using those kind of terms so that it's not discriminating against or excluding people who choose to be non-binary. So there are things that you can do there. Facilities is a little bit more difficult. I understand that, and it may be beyond a lot of people's control in what they can do in that space. But for those who are in an environment where they might be able to create a separate gender neutral space, then I think that's probably something to think about. Again, it's about how all people within your workforce are able to become or able to feel as if they're included. So the second slide here talks about support and enablement. And again, it's something that Becky touched on around the work that they do to make sure in their policies and their procedures, they have recognition of and inclusion of LGBTQ+. So I would recommend, if you've got the space and the time and the capacity, to have a look in your policies and procedures to see whether or not you're meeting current legislative practices, whether or not you've got mention of LGBTQ+ community and workforce in there, whether there's support in there. And that's kind of the second point I'm making here about clarity and visibility regarding who and where to go for support and or to report issues. So some of it may be about reporting issues, and obviously everybody needs to know who they need to go to. And it may be that it's the same person, and it may just be about being clear about that. But equally, if it's about support, if, for example, you've got a cohort of people coming into your organization and you want to make sure that they know if they want to come out, if they're questioning their gender or their sexual identity, that there is somewhere for them to go and somebody to whom they can speak. It's really important that these people understand that. Some of you may know that there has been a trend in young people going to university, being very open about their sexual identity and their gender identity, but actually getting into a more corporate workplace and going back into the closet because they find it to be very heteronormative, very masculine, white dominated, and they don't necessarily feel that they will be accepted. So there is a huge trend, and actually there are a lot of big businesses that are doing a lot of work to try and change that, because it's just not right that people, young people in particular, that anybody really should be entering a career and feel that they have to hide a part of an aspect of their identity because they don't feel they fit into that culture. So things about clarity, visibility, and enabling are just so important, so that anybody who's engaging within your organization, anybody who's joining your organization or progressing through your organization, feels that they're supported regardless of their gender or their sexual identities, or whether or not they're feeling like they need to change or they're questioning any of that. So the last thing I've got here is around empowerment. And again, Becky's covered this really, really well. So things about visibility, accessible advocates and allies amongst the LGBTQ plus and other staff members. So this is as much about showing people that from the top, and I was really glad actually to hear Becky say that they have senior representation. I think that's critical. If you're able, throughout every single strand of your organization, from a board level through to the staff level and your junior staff level, at every single rung, if you're able to get representation, and as I said before, not necessarily from somebody who is within the LGBTQ plus community, but an ally who supports the community, it's really important because it enables, well, it evidences whole organization support and engagement. And but it also enables every single level to be part of that process. So if you can get an advocate or an ambassador from board level through to senior executive and leadership, through to management, through to the rest, then that's really important. Having a network, if you've got the staff numbers to create a network, that's brilliant. What I would say to that, and what I've found a number of times, is that there is a real interest from most organizations to have a network, but there is quite often there's very little to no resourcing that goes into that, or recognition beyond enabling people to take an hour every now and then to go to a meeting. For an LGBTQ plus or other minority representative network to be really effective, it, I believe, needs to be recognised. So is it built into somebody's annual appraisals that actually this is something really positive and proactive they're doing? And does it go towards the positivity that they're creating and supporting within the workplace? So for me, it needs to be recognised. Also, quite often you'll have people who go to these meetings, but their direct line manager doesn't necessarily value it. So it's about that education of the workforce for me, to understand why it's relevant, why it's important, but also to give those staff members who are doing this work that space to do it, and to reward them for engaging, because the purpose of an LGBTQ plus network is to provide support for the workforce, to enable that workforce to work better and to be more productive ultimately for your organization, but to feel supported and engaged within their organization. So I've mentioned before about policies and procedures. So things like proactive revisions and refinements of policies and procedures that recognise and value the LGBTQ plus workforce in line with positive legislative changes Now, that is something that networks can do, LGBTQ plus networks can do if they exist. And if not, then as part of, I would recommend as part of your general review, annual review, or however you've scheduled your reviews of policies and procedures, just have a mind to that as well, to see whether or not that inclusivity is within your within the existing policies, or whether it's something that you can add in to ensure you're part of that process as well. So that's me done, and just the 2 contact details here. As I said, please do get in touch to join the Alliance Network. We've got the website there, and it's got a contact page. If you would like to know, and it would be remiss of me not to mention this, if you would like to know about the training packages that I offer, please have a look on my website or get in touch with me on maidenconsult@gmail.com. So that's me done. Emily, back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. Some incredible insights there. I mean, there's statistics that start shocking: the 42% increase in homophobic attacks and 56%, was it, in transphobic attacks in the UK?
Yeah.
Those are quite alarming. And I think the combination of or the array of different kind of techniques and approaches to helping make our LGBTQ plus colleagues feel kind of included. A real mix of kind of smaller practical things, all the way through to, like you say, policies and procedures, whether you can change your facilities, looking at kind of tweeting language, things like that are a really good mix. And like you say, I think some things that are really actionable for organisations of all sizes, not just the large organisations that maybe have a bit more resource to put into this sort of thing.
Absolutely. I do think that's really important. There's always something everybody can do, regardless of how small or large your organisation is. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, I'll invite Becky to come back as well. We've got a few questions that have been asked in the chat, which I know you've mentioned. You've answered the question about getting leadership buy-in. I think both of you. One of the questions I think is really interesting: how do you recognise kind of intersectionality in those diversity and inclusion networks? So I know, Becky, you mentioned that LGBTQ plus inclusion fits within a wider a wider piece on diversity and inclusion at Kier Highways. Is there, how do you kind of, how does someone who fits into a number of those networks, how do they engage across all of them?
Yeah, so like I said, we've got 6 networks. We do have networks that kind of cover an array of different identities. We also have a Kier Inclusion Network, which is more of an overarching network looking at inclusion more generally. And that is probably the more centralized point for all the networks. So on the Kier Inclusion Network Committee, we look at what all of the networks are doing and see where they can maybe align, where they can work together. So if they're doing particular events on a day that can be relevant to different communities, different groups, and we try and get them to work together to educate people on that intersectionality. Because I think it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to educate people on either, because I think it's very misunderstood. It's spoken a lot more about now than it used to be, but I think now people think of it more as kind of a tick list of identities, and that's it, when it's not. It's about that kind of overlapping systems of oppression. So I think it's really important to educate people on that. And in terms of the networks, the way to do that is to get them to kind of join forces, combine their education, combine their awareness and events where they can. And then we as a Inclusion Network Committee see where we can keep them all kind of aligned. But it is difficult. And like you say, if somebody identifies with 6 different networks, that's a lot of time. And like Matt was saying, a lot of the time, if you're part of a network, it's always in addition to your day job. There's sometimes not the kind of acknowledgement that is something that you're doing in addition that is boosting the inclusion and the environment in your company. And so if you have to join 6 networks, then that's quite a big time constraint. So I think, trying to see where they can overlap and where we can get people working together is the key there.
Brilliant. And I love what you said, Matt, about recognizing the contribution to those networks as it is above and beyond the day job, if that's the right term to use. but it's something that's valuable to the company and shouldn't be overlooked.
I think also, though, it's an interesting one because because it's very easy to pay lip service. And I think for an organisation to genuinely engage and to genuinely support, it does need to enable their staff members to do their best within those networks. So, as I said, it's really important for me that people recognise that from the outset. And actually, it's like with anything, the more you enable, the more you will get back, and the better these networks are able to be and the more constructive. Quite often what you'll find is that networks have a real flurry of excitement and interest at the outset, but they can very easily kind of wind down and lose that kind of impetus because then the individuals who are a part of it, the ones that do really good work and are really engaged, are the ones that then get loaded with more, and then they struggle to do that with their day job. And then naturally everybody starts to get demotivated. And it's really important that there is that recognition and there is that progression and the opportunity for people collectively to keep moving forward. And on the intersectionality aspect, I think it is really important for people to recognise that people aren't just representing one particular, minority or characteristic. Everybody is diverse, and for employees to recognise that, and for people, obviously, I think Becky mentioned it, around its self-identity and how people feel they wish to identify themselves, and respecting that, and then I suppose providing the opportunity for people to show that how best they feel appropriate to them.
Absolutely. I think something that, and you touched on it with those statistics that you shared, Matt. What does this look like when it's done well? Like what can a greater focus on LGBTQ plus inclusivity have for businesses and individuals?
For me, I mean, I've probably over the last 18 months, I think I've probably delivered training to about 50 different organisations, and what I see immediately from the training I deliver, that education and awareness. So for so many people, they don't necessarily understand what the LGBT, because it's LGBTQIA, and there are other letters, but they're the kind of, standard. And I think for a lot of people, it's confusing. And just why are there so many? What does it mean? But also the use of pronouns, and that again, that's something that I could have talked about a little bit more in around becoming a more inclusive organisation, and including your pronoun on your email signature is a kind of subconscious nod and awareness raising for people. A lot of these things are confusing. People who are choosing to be non-binary and so forth. What I've found when people are educated, it just becomes so much easier. And I remember a number of years ago, somebody quite bravely stood up from a very large corporate organisation and said, look, we do want to engage, we do want to do things here, but I just don't want to offend anybody. So we kind of just keep backing away from it. And that really struck me. And that's kind of why I deliver the training I deliver, because once you just break that down and give people that awareness, then it becomes so much easier. The conversation's easier and the opportunity is easier. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to enable people from the LGBTQ plus community to feel like they are bringing their whole selves to work, which I know is a kind of bit of a cliche these days, but it's still so true. For people to feel comfortable to talk about their partners and their weekend, it makes them much more productive, much more engaged, and if the rest of the aspects of their job, I should caveat it by saying, are where they want it to be, it just makes them a much fuller, more content person. And by dint of that, they'll stay with the organisation and they'll be more productive. And actually, there is just a greater sense of inclusivity and engagement and productivity, I think, with organisations who do embrace this or just educate themselves a little bit more around it.
Absolutely. Becky, did you have any thoughts on what it looks like when it's done really well, and where what impact it can have having that focus on LGBTQ plus inclusion?
Yeah, I think I would just echo what Matt said, really. I think there's the two sides to it. The first is, I'm the same, I'm a bit reticent to say bring your whole self to work because we've heard it so many times. But we've heard it so many times because it kind of hits the nail on the head. And I think for the LGBTQ plus community, it's being able to come to work and not feel like they leave one version of themselves at home at the door and walk into work as another person or another version of that person, that it is the same person the whole way through. Like Matt said, they don't have to consider, when I'm talking about what I did at my weekend, how am I wording my partner, or if I say my partner, what are people expecting? That there's none of that they can just focus on doing the job that they're supposed to be doing, having the relationships that they want to have at work with their colleagues without all of this extra stuff and consideration. And then I think for everybody else, for allies, for senior leaders, for their colleagues, it is that lack of fear. I've had very similar conversations, as Matt said, where people say, I want to talk about it, but I'm so scared to say the wrong thing that I just don't talk about it at all. And actually, I think that's worse. As long as people are willing and open to be told, oh, actually, I wouldn't say it like this because X, Y, Z, you're better to say it like this. And they accept that and say, oh, sorry, okay, I'll learn from that and move on. As long as you go in with that open kind of mindset, you're much better to talk about it than just to never mention it at all, because then people feel like they're this problem, this elephant in the room that nobody's speaking about, when actually they'd much rather you discuss things with them, ask questions where appropriate, and got it slightly wrong and learn from that, because otherwise you're probably just getting it wrong in private over and over again and never learning. So I think that when you're doing it right, there's that openness, that sense that this is a safe environment to learn, to get things wrong, to grow and develop together.
Absolutely. I love that message of kind of approaching it and not talking about it, if that makes sense. And it's a really good visualization, that elephant in the room.
And just very quickly on that, a point that I often make is it's fine to challenge, it's fine to question, be respectful in the way you do it. That's all you need to do. You can ask those awkward questions, just do it respectfully, and it won't offend. And absolutely, as Becky said, I think many people would much prefer the question asked and answered rather than ignored or avoided, because that never solves a problem, does it really?
No, definitely not. I know you've both touched on the education piece and the value of educating organizations or educating people within organizations. As experts, very much experts in this field, are there any resources that you'd recommend or point people in the direction of, who maybe are within smaller organizations, really at the start of this journey and thinking about how they begin to approach it, where to start with that education piece?
I think there are a number of places that people can go. I mean, Stonewall for many years has been doing a lot of things around training and development, but certainly I would suggest having a look on Stonewall's website to see what's there. Birmingham LGBT also, I'd say that's probably more around services and opportunities that are available now. I mean, again, I'm kind of reluctant to, because it's probably the third time, but I have noticed there's a question in there as well, so I'm slightly addressing that. The training, I think, is really important. When I started delivering this kind of training, the awareness training, I was really surprised at how little there was around. To respond directly to that question, I offer a kind of 1 hour session, which is for any staff within the workforce, and I think important around that sort of education point. It's a 1 hour session because it's kind of it's to not take people away from the workplace for too much, but to give them an opportunity. And then there's a broader one that I offer, which I would offer more, I'd say, for team leaders and for general organizational leaders, because it goes a little more in depth. It talks about intersectionality. It talks about, things like pronouns and various other things. It also touches on unconscious bias. So, as I said, I was quite surprised at how little information there was out there. You will find that there are some services, whether it be NHS or whether it be mental health support services, that will have some literature and information available. A lot of that will be around what the situation is for the LGBTQ plus community and some of the issues that they're facing, but that itself is quite good. There's a resource that was pulled together by Birmingham LGBT that should be available on their website, which was the impact of COVID on the LGBTQ plus community. That's really interesting. I would recommend having a look at that because that's very local and very relevant. That's a starter for 10. I'll have a think, and if there's anything further, then I can forward it.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a good list to get started with. Becky, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think like Matt says, there's ones like Stonewall that will also have things like the A to Z terminology, which sometimes when we get kind of going on webinars and things like this, we forget that there's so many words. And I think, Matt, you mentioned earlier about kind of heteronormativity, and you say, oh, if you don't know what that means, because you forget and you do get so used to saying all these things. I think another thing that I'd recommend, and again, Matt, you mentioned earlier about pink news, I would recommend looking at things like that, to reading kind of the articles and the blogs, news that's coming out from the community, because if you're looking to see what kind of things are affecting the community here and now, there's no better place to go than kind of to the source, see what is being written about in publications like that. The other thing that I would say around training is just to look at kind of who is delivering it and where it's come from. I think sometimes companies that do general D&I training will then get people say, oh, I'd like something more specific about LGBT, and they'll kind of cobble something together. But I think it's good to look at who is writing that training. If anybody involved is actually from the LGBTQ plus community, if anybody can kind of say that they're an expert, or they have any kind of lived experience, or they've worked in the field for a long time, anything like that. Because I think D&I as a space generally has grown massively really quickly, and that's brilliant because it means a lot of work's being done. But it does mean that there are sometimes training companies that pop up who don't actually have the experience or the kind of input from certain communities to back those things up. So I think it's just worth kind of looking, when you're looking at those training providers, seeing what their kind of background is, where they have that information from, or if it's just what they've got online that you could probably go and get yourself. I'm sure that's not what Matt does. I'm saying other people.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. And I love that idea of kind of immersing yourself in live news stories, because I think, Matt, you touched on the impact of COVID on the LGBTQ plus community in Birmingham. I suppose taking that approach with news stories as well gives you that local angle.
Just one other thing, sorry, I forgot, as you just reminded me, I think it was CIPD, so you would have to have access, but there are like LGBT plus at work reports where they've done surveys on kind of large numbers of people from the LGBT community to see how they feel at work specifically. So things like that are helpful when you're looking at this for the first time.
And I just remembered, actually, a number of years ago, the Alliance Network produced a resource which was about how to make your workplace a bit more inclusive. That, I think, is on the website. I'm hesitating only because I know that the original version, I'm sure it involved clip art, if anybody remembers that. So that worries me, because I edited the document. I didn't do the clip art, but I edited the document. I've subsequently updated it, but I'll make sure the updated version is on the website, the Alliance website. So that's a really useful resource, because we pull that together from one of those hybrid briefing sessions where people were sharing best practice, and we just kind of put a top 10 together. So it's a really useful, practical, easy to read document. I will make sure we have an updated version of that on the site as soon as possible, if it isn't already there.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that's a brilliant note to end on. And thank you both ever so much for your time. I'm just going to share my slides again. But just to say a huge thank you to you both, Matt and Becky. I thank you as well, of course, to our sponsors who make Growth Through People possible, Aston University, Southern City College, Birmingham, and the West Midlands Combined Authority. We have one upcoming Growth Through People event, if anyone watching is interested, coming along, talking about harnessing personal resilience in challenging times. Got some fantastic speakers, Rebecca Manda from Guru U, and a representative from Thrive at Work. And then, like I mentioned at the start, we've got our annual Growth Through People conference on the 10th of May, where we'll be talking more about diversity and inclusion, responsible leadership, attracting and engaging, retaining talent, and harnessing resilience, organisational and personal. My colleague Curran is going to put a link in the chat now. There's a slight delay, so in any moment, there we go. We're currently, so Growth Through People very much is based on the feedback that we get from the local business community. Your input into what the campaign should look like, your feedback on the events and webinars really assists us in developing the campaign. There are also some questions where we'll be conducting original research into leadership and people management skills in the region to advise our wider policy work in employment skills. If you could spare 5 minutes to complete our survey, it'd be hugely, hugely appreciated. Like I said, the link is in the chat. But just to say a huge thank you again to Matt and Becky. I think it's been a really informative session. I have a ton of notes written down in front of me, and hopefully those who have been watching do too.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, all.